Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today we're going to be talking about writing flash fiction. Flash fiction kind of falls under the short fiction umbrella, but it's on the shorter end. So while a short story may be, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, even up to like 8,000 words, flash fiction is on the very, very short end of that. So flash fiction can be as short as a sentence and as long as about 1,500 words. Beyond that, we're more into short story territory. Flash fiction is kind of on the border between a short story and a poem. It takes the format of fiction, but it can be looser and briefer, and has a lot of very unique qualities. The secret with flash fiction is to focus on movement rather than traditional story structure. You're not going to be able to fit a traditional story structure into such a small space. So instead, you want to think about revealing something new or creating movement with every single sentence. So if you want to get started with flash fiction, here are a few tips. First of all is to create a hook immediately. You don't have a lot of space, so you want to grab a reader's attention immediately and keep it for the entire story. Even though flash fiction doesn't really have traditional story structure, you can think of hitting these 3 points. The hook, which you can do by starting right in the middle of the conflict. There's no introduction, there's no lead up. You start right at the beginning where there's already an established and interesting conflict of some kind. And that conflict can be really subtle. But you want to begin with that hook with that sense of conflict and urgency. Then the middle, which is where throughout the middle of the story, you're going to develop and add nuance to that conflict. And then the ending, which is going to deliver the story's final message or cap it off with some kind of reveal or clarity. These aren't beats like in a larger story, but more like markers where you deliver crucial information or shift our understanding of the story and characters. Think of them as kind of these micro turning points in a very compressed narrative. Tip number 2 is to keep it as streamlined as possible. In flash fiction, you don't want any excess characters or ideas. You want to keep the story as contained as possible, with not a single line of excess dialogue, excess description, or any excess concepts that don't contribute to the very core of the story. Do one thing and do it really, really well, instead of focusing on trying to do a bunch of things and compressing a much larger story into a really short space. Hone in on the core of the story and make sure everything is connected to it. The next tip is to use the form to your advantage. Some conventions of flash fiction are intense prose and voice, a powerful central image, and the most compressed format possible. What you don't want to do is rework a bigger idea and squish it into 1,500 words. If the story wants to be longer, let it be longer. A flash fiction piece should be by nature a flash fiction piece and should be comfortable in that space. An idea this small should usually be focused on a very precise moment. It is going to be more about the movement of the central image or feeling or idea rather than standard plot development. The next really important tip is to avoid cliches. In such a simple compressed format, it's really important to avoid cliches because one cliche in an 800-word story can really drag down and kind of sour the whole piece. You don't have a lot of space, so every single detail should be original and interesting. Cliched, commonly written about settings like a funeral or a family holiday aren't very well suited to the flash fiction format. You usually need more space in order to develop those ideas with nuance and originality because we've seen them before. I find flash fiction is often best suited to very strange or intense moments where the concept itself is already kind of a hook of originality. A story that is familiar in some way is going to need more room to breathe. Instead, flash fiction is a great space for the weird and the strange, something that's going to immediately grab the reader's attention with its originality and keep their attention through the entire, very short piece. The next tip is to deliver a powerful punchline. In some ways, flash fiction functions a lot like a joke. There's a brief setup, and then a punchline that kind of changes or clarifies the setup that came beforehand. Every sentence in your flash fiction piece should deliver something new and distinct, but the last sentence may be the most important because it gives clarity to everything that came before. One thing about flash that's different from other forms is that it's kind of okay for the reader to be a little confused throughout, so long as the ending provides that clarity. A lot of the time, the ending of a flash fiction puts everything that came before into perspective. Because it's such a short piece, we can kind of keep the reader in a state of semi-confusion as long as we really deliver and give clarity that makes that confusion meaningful in the end. In a longer piece, the reader would probably give up if they felt too confused, but because flash fiction is so short, you can kind of keep the reader in that state as long as you deliver on it. And finally, don't be afraid to experiment. I think that the short form is the best place to experiment. It's easier to experiment in a short story rather than a novel, and it's even easier to experiment in a flash fiction than a short story. Flash fiction is a lot like poetry in that sense, in that it's so loose and free. A lot of the time we think that a shorter form means that it's more constrained and so there's less space to experiment, but I actually think it's the opposite. You don't need to sustain that experiment for very long, so it's a great place to be free and try new things. If you have a really weird idea that you're not sure would be sustainable in a longer piece, flash fiction is the best place to try it, especially because it's such a short form. It's very low stakes. It's one of the best things about flash fiction. If it doesn't work out, that's fine. But you can often pull off some really, really bizarre stuff in flash fiction, and it's one of the best formats to try strange or experimental things. So don't be afraid to do that. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Friday on this channel. Until next time, bye.